The sermon title today, This Blessedness. This blessedness. And before I dig into the sermon that I tried to prepare with my woozy cold head, just to make it clear, I went to Denver for my study leave, attending the West Star Institute's annual fall meeting. But I read this morning in the paper, to my surprise, that the American Flat Earth Society also had their annual conference in Denver. And I just want to make clear I didn't go to that one. And I have witnesses to back me up. From the sermon titles, some of you may conclude correctly that I have a bit of a problem with the term blessedness or being blessed. And I must confess that I overreact for the wrong reasons, because some people take this term and that is what their whole involvement in religion and a life of faith and so forth is for them. I shy away from the term, and it gives me the shivers sometimes. Again, for the wrong reason, because if I listen to some of the theological frameworks, the thinking around this term, blessedness or being blessed or being a blessing, you almost detect a making of God in the image of a dispensing machine, where if you push the right buttons, you get the right candy. And if you behave in the right way and do the right stuff, the result will be good things coming your way, which you call then a blessing. And people dispense these blessings willy-nilly across cultures, not only in the US, everywhere that I've lived, and I've been a few places in my life, it's the same thing. Those that are still willing to call themselves Christians, and even those that do not have anything to do with church, like to talk about God's blessings, and that they are a blessing to this and that. It's almost like Pavlov, a Pavlovian approach. Do the right thing, you're rewarded. The wrong thing, you're punished. And my problem with that is that it is a very cruel approach. Because that scheme of following the rules, doing the right stuff, and then getting the reward for it works for as long as the good people, when they do good things, are rewarded for it. And the wicked and the bad people that do bad stuff, they are punished for it and they suffer. But the scheme breaks down in a very cruel way when the good people start to suffer and the bad ones seem to prosper and flourish. And what do we do then? The problem is also when the good people who are suffering, are then told by these people who adhere to the simple schematic, this Pavlovian approach, that it's not God's fault, it's your fault. You're a sinner. There's something wrong, somewhat like Job. And in the Bible study, we're wrestling with Job at the moment. The people who are suffering then, the good people, are told, God doesn't like you. Put it simply. You are doing something wrong, therefore God is punishing you. And then the whole thing of being blessed, for me, gets, as I say, a cruel twist to it. It's also, for me, often something unappetizing in that thinking, because it is a selfish approach. You do things, good things, not because you want to do good things, because you are expecting the candy, the reward. afterwards. And let me quote one of the main proponents of this theological thinking, Brother Joel Osteen, the guy with the big church in Orlando. And I don't know how many jets he has at this moment, but he's got ample transportation, I think, to get where he wants to collect the blessings. There are people in your path just so you can be a blessing to them. Anytime you do good for others, you are sowing a seed for God to be good to you. Clearly going after the reward there. And then another quotation, when you focus on being a blessing, God makes sure that you are always blessed in abundance. Again, quite clear, the schematic and the thinking there. So my first plea to you this morning is, don't do what I do to shy away from the term blessing and being blessed, because I think it is a central theme, not in the Old Testament, but also in the New Testament. We find that language distributed in abundance through the Bible. So let us very briefly look at our scripture passage. It is part of the bigger narrative that we find in the book of Genesis and that continues for a good part of the Old Testament. It starts off, this big narrative, with the creation stories. And where we find the original blessing, Genesis 1, verse 22, where God says in this creation story, after the creation was done, God blessed it and said it was good. And right through the creation story, at least the first creation story that we find in the Bible, the one that most of us probably know, or at least better than the second story, we find references to creation being good and God being satisfied with it and God saying this is good. It seems that the term bless in the Old Testament, or at least in the first part of the Old Testament, refers to God creating the ability and conveying this ability to people to experience the abundance and to experience life in its full splendor and life in its full goodness, as God intended for people to experience, all people to experience. And in the Old Testament mind, and Martha will probably be able to add a lot to what I'm saying, but we can do that afterwards, Martha, in the interest of time. It means in the Old Testament context, briefly, I think, to experience good health, to have prosperity, to be blessed with material good things, to have a good number of children, and then to enjoy with your children and the people that you care about and that are close to you the good life and live in peace. There is this image of every Israelite sitting under his own fig tree, drinking the wine from his own vineyard while enjoying the company of his children and his wives and the good people that he would like to spend time with. So that original blessing, after God bestowed that on the world and on people, what happened? Something went wrong. People committed sin and got separated from God, and they were not enjoying this good life and this blessing because of that. So what we find here is a restoration of that ability to everybody through the Jewish people, where God calls Abraham and said, I want to restore this relationship and this original blessing to everybody, and I will use you as the instrument through which I will channel that blessing. So you, as my people, who I have the covenant with and who I will live with in a special relationship, you are to be the channel through which my blessing, this ability to enjoy life as it was intended, the abundance that God created, you will be my people through which I will channel that. So, what are we to make of this passage? Are we all going to Ancestry.com to look and see if we have Jewish ancestry so that we can say, all right, I'm part of this group of people through which God will distribute the blessings. And as God's special people, we at least have a better chance of also experiencing this blessing and being blessed. I want to briefly suggest perhaps an approach where we don't run away from the term as I normally do, but where we can embrace it. As God's people, live in and through that blessing, and as God's people also be, as Israel was called to be and Abram was called to be, the people bringing that blessing to the rest of the world. I forgot to say about the blessing as I think we find it in at least one of the traditions in the Old Testament, that to bless somebody means to bestow this power to life. I think for us living today, and for us as members or people associated in whatever way with the Congregational Church of Topsfield, for us on Stewardship Sunday and on Thanksgiving Sunday, I want to say, let us embrace this word, this blessedness. I think experiencing life in its full abundance is a result of experiencing and opening yourself up to the fullness of God's unconditional love. And when you do that, and when you experience God's Spirit in you, and as a result of that experience, God's Spirit around you as well, then it happens that you are no longer at the center of your universe, but that you find this unconditional acceptance and the homecoming into the universe through the homecoming into God's love. Through that you find the ability to look beyond yourself and to live beyond yourself. Through what God's Spirit stirs in you and creates in you, you become part of the new creation in God's love, where you do what is good and what the Spirit calls you to do, not because you want some kind of reward, not because you want some kind of recognition, not because you are afraid of something, but you do what is good. And through that, live a life-giving life through which you become the channel of God's love, and you bestow the power to experience abundant life also to those around you. And in the process of growing in this love, which is spiritual growth, you grow in compassion, and you are able to be transformed by God's Spirit and God's love. And you are able to be a blessing and transform the world to be the world that God intended, a world of peace and of justice. That is the life that God calls us to live. That is the life that is possible for each one of us. And that fills us with gratitude when we have that authentic encounter of God's love and live authentically and truthfully and consistently in that love. And then there is much to be grateful for. Looking at our church, for me, I'm grateful that there is an identity forming of a broad group of our membership coming together on shared values, where we open ourselves to God's Spirit and be a blessing to the world around us, feeding the poor, feeding the hungry, but also fulfilling our prophetic duty, to which we're also called, to at least investigate through our studies, Bible study, and through our reading circle, perhaps causes for hunger, and look at the structural element of hunger, and to be the voice for the voiceless, to be the voice for those who are marginalized and cannot speak for themselves. I'm grateful for so many dedicated leaders that are stepping up and doing what they find themselves called to do, dedicating countless hours to the work of this church and the work, what we believe is the work of the kingdom as well. I'm going to single out somebody in this sermon, in this service, and that is Kristen Palace, our moderator. She is not a drama queen, but she's the one person I would like to have next to me when the going gets tough. I'm grateful to be working with her. And on behalf of the congregation, thank you, Kristen, for countless hours work behind the scenes that you are doing. I'm grateful for the spirit in the congregation, like in a tough time, like when we suddenly find ourselves without staff in the music department, that people step up. Like Joe and Rob Hardy, other musicians and the choir. I'm grateful to be part of that. And I can continue with a long list, but I see the clock is running, and I need to come to a conclusion here. I want to invite you to continue to live in an openness to God's Spirit, so that we may indeed experience a blessing of living in God's love, and that we may experience that growth in the Spirit, where that becomes our primary focus, to be channels of God's love. Let us continue to be open to be transformed in that way and do work of love every moment that we are conscious, so that we may experience a blessing and be a blessing to the world. May God lead us in that way. Amen.